Welcome back to the program. It's exactly 36 minutes past the hour. We're going to talk more about that individual we've seen on a big screen there. That has everything to do with Deputy President William Ruto and some comments he made yesterday with regards to the referendum. Of course, we're seeing a disinterested president, a very much interested Deputy President this time round with regards to the referendum. So it's something that has sharply divided the political class, those who are for and against the referendum. For now, let's listen into what some of the politicians had to say with regards to the referendum debate.
We are going to do a referendum this time. I would like to ask the church to take the leadership, unite this country. Let us have a non-contested referendum. Kikije kikaumana tena.
I want to tell our colleagues who are in the opposition, we do not fear elections, we don't fear referendum. There is only one condition, and I'm speaking as the majority leader of Jubilee Party in the Senate. If the President of the Republic of Kenya, who is the party leader of Jubilee, and the Deputy President, who is the Deputy Party leader, call a parliamentary group meeting and leaders meeting of Jubilee and announce that we no longer pursue the Big Four agenda, we go for referendum, I can assure you we will go.
And inclusivity cannot be addressed unless we tackle the system of government. And that means that parliamentary system, we must turn back to a system of a parliamentary system of democracy if you are going to have inclusivity in the Republic of Kenya.
Tunataka reduce your cost ya running parliament to only 5 billion. In order to reduce your cost, ni lazima tupunguze wabunge ambayo kwa sasa ni 416 hadi 194 pekee.
That there shall be, not will, there shall be a referendum, whether you like it or not. Because there is no any government in the world that can carry its programs under the current constitution of Kenya. This is the most expensive constitution for any government to implement its projects. You can't have all this number of representatives everywhere who are numbering more than even ordinary citizens, and then you expect the taxpayers' money to shoulder the responsibilities of managing a representation in Kenya. Two, after elections, people have been fighting. There is no peace. We must address that area of governance. We must look at that structure fresh. And this is in the interest of everybody, including the Deputy President who wants to become a president. It's better to become a president in a manageable situation.
A question around the structure of government. There is a national question around the size of government. And there is a national question around the performance of government.
This country must change, and the eastern horizon is visible, and there is sun emerging, and you cannot hide the sun once it is out.
My proposal is that we adopt a three-tier system that retains the current counties, creates regional or provincial governments, and retains the national government with a very clear formula for revenue sharing.
Clearly, once again, the question is when the referendum is going to happen, not if it's going to happen. Is it going to happen in 2019, 2020? I think only time will tell. And now, members of parliament, the clergy, and a section of the political parties have already made their proposals, a number of recommendations with regards to the referendum. And let me go through some of them there. NCCK, this is what they're proposing. They're saying the expansion of the executive should be there, reducing the number of elected leaders. And then they're also proposing to reduce the number of nominated leaders. They're saying the executive to include the position of Prime Minister. Now, NCCK further recommends 2 deputies to the Prime Minister and reduce the number of the cabinet secretaries for the purposes of inclusivity. Now, the Punguza Mizigo campaign by the Third Way Alliance, I understand they're still collecting signatures. The last time I checked, they were slightly above 500,000. I believe they're now close to the million number mark. Now they're saying the legislatures should be reduced to 194 from the current 416. Those include members of the National Assembly and the Senate. And they're saying each county should be considered as a single constituency for purposes of elections to the Senate and National Assembly. So from the proposal there, we're going to have a 47 constituencies. Now they're saying they're planning to elevate Senate to be an upper house with veto powers and also increase counties' revenue share to 35% from the current 15%. And they're also saying that they use the ward as a unit of development, replacing CDF programs. Finally, these are just several proposals by different members of parliament, that those who are proposing to reduce number of counties and county assemblies to 12 from the 47 that we currently have. There are other members of parliament who are also proposing the Senate should be abolished and nominated member of parliament position should also be abolished, as well as the MCA position that is elected and nominated altogether. They don't see the reason as to why this country should have MCAs in the first place. And then they also are proposing the provision of positions of executive prime minister to head government. And there are also a section of members of parliament who are proposing that health, education, roads be national government functions. Well, those are just some of the proposals. They are made by the church under the NCCK, that is the clergy, and then there are other proposals that have been made by the members of parliament, as well as a section of the political parties, top on the list being the Third Way Alliance. And now let's continue the discussion here in studio. I still have Dismas, Mark and Hesbon. Dismas, let me begin with you this time round. You've seen the proposals that have been made there by, the MPs, the church, as well as some of the political parties. I mean, do you agree with some of the proposals that they are suggesting?
I mean, when you go through these proposals, the only thing which comes to your mind is that all of them are very lazy proposals. Mm-hmm. Nobody has taken time to actually understand what is affecting the nation. What is affecting the nation is not the size of the national governments, nor is it the size of the county governments. It's the productivity of the national government and the productivity of the county governments. Mm-hmm. And the kind of proposals they're bringing forward to allow for productivity in the nation. Going back to the pet subject of maize production in the Rift Valley, all these proposals here do not address the maize productivity in Rift Valley. For instance, if you want to reduce Kenya's debt crisis, you do not need a referendum. You do not need to review the constitution. You just need to be sure that the person who is running the national treasury is up to his job. Mm-hmm. So all these proposals given by the NCCK, which encourages corruption by receiving money every Saturday and Sunday, they are just lazy proposals.
Don't you think the numbers are a point of concern? I think Esbon is going to go through some of the numbers shortly, but we have more than 1,450 MCAs. Those are elected, 752 nominated. We have 340-something members of parliament, 67 senators. I mean, don't you think these numbers are a bit too much, bearing in mind that we're spending about 675 billion Kenyan shillings on them?
When we attained independence, we had a constitution, and then you had people saying that we need a new constitution. Mm-hmm. So people were fighting left, right, and center, saying we need a new constitution. So we got one in 2010. As this addressed all these issues, and you recall a gentleman by the name Mishuki said, in fact, we never needed a new constitution. We just needed President Moi to get out of office. And that's why this constitution, the push for this referendum, is merely anchored on personalities. It's not anchored on scientific issues. Like, for instance, for the sugarcane farmers in Western Kenya, out of all these proposals, is there a single one which addresses the issue? There's none. And for us to come up with these proposals, we need to have a national dialogue, a very specific one, because these proposals are being put forth by politicians and a few religious leaders. Mm-hmm. So what happens to Mura, who is not a religious leader or who is not a politician? We should have a national dialogue where we should be able to identify all these issues and sort them out. And when you're talking about the over 2,800 elected leaders, we need to give them, instead of saying we've got a huge number, let's give them performance indicators on what they're supposed to be doing. Part of the reason why we are talking about this referendum is because all these 2,800 elected leaders mm-hmm. are shooting in the dark. They do not know what they're supposed to be doing. Like, for instance, if you go back now to the issue still of maize, do you need a new referendum to pay those farmers? Mm-hmm. Do you need a referendum to know that some of those managers have engaged in mischief and they should be jailed? I mean, this reminds me the other day when President Kenyatta was very furious. He even swore. And you know the president is supposed only to be swearing when he's been sworn into office. So we just need drastic action. Mm-hmm. But going to the referendum, it's not going to help at all, because we are going to be held hostage by these powerful politicians. All of them are on the page 1 of the Sunday Standard. We are going to dance to their whims. And we are not sure whether their selfish interests are consistent with Mora's interests, or they're consistent with the public interest, or they're consistent with national interest. Like, for instance, Raila Odinga says we must go for a referendum. We do not even know the question. And then the deputy president, before he did a U-turn, he said, no referendum. We do not even know the question. So these people are becoming emotional. This thing is not scientific. That's why we need, first of all, to audit this constitution in a scientific manner and really identify whether there are issues which need to be sorted out through a referendum, or maybe we just need to have a supporting legislation. Like, for instance, to address corruption, you've got Chapter 6. And even in the absence of Chapter 6, the Penal Code is sufficient to address those issues. When you go to the National Treasury, one wonders why still the team at the National Treasury is there. You saw a few days ago, we were told that in the month of July and August, for every 100 shillings collected, 57 goes to pay debts. That's when you don't need a referendum to sort that one out. You just need to get a reasonable manager managing the treasury. So these things, in my view, are going to be held hostage by politicians. We'll do a referendum, we change the constitution, then 10 years later we say, again, let's do a referendum, instead of addressing the core issues.
So there are fears that politicians might hijack it once again?
No, it's not a fear. They've already hijacked it.
It is a reality.
Yeah, they've hijacked it.
Let me allow Mark to talk about
Let me tell you, let Kenyans be very, very clear, okay? The call for a referendum, to us, the normal citizen, it means the reduction of these 770 nominated MCAs, one of whom said on radio that she had no idea what a nomination is, she had no idea what an MCA is, she had no idea how much she's getting paid, and for all she is worth, she had no idea what an MCA does or what an MCA is. She thought it was a car.
The ineffectiveness Moko was talking about.
Ineffectiveness. Now, let me tell you, the question Wanjiku is asking, do we need 1,000 fools, or we can reduce them to 200 and manage that process better? That is the question, okay? You know, we have to ask ourselves very honest questions. We have 349 MPs, 47, okay?
Yes.
If you watch news, other than the singing and dancing and heckling they did during the 16% versus 8% versus 0%, when was the last time there was debate in Parliament equivalent to what we used to do in Class 8 in Kilimo Primary School, where I came from? If we take those Class 8 children, they will debate better than our parliamentarians. We know for a fact that parliamentarians whose tongues will stick to the roofs of their mouths when they're asked to speak on the floor of the House. So what quality of legislation are we getting? There's a thing, an amorphous thing called a Senate, that went all the way to Eldoret to tell farmers very obvious things, okay, on our bill, okay? So my question, the question in Wanjiku's mind is clear. IQ and intelligence does not seem to increase by the number of MCAs and MPs we have. Let's reduce them, okay? Let's be very clear. Do we need a Senate? I was asking myself, can I remember any, to use Dismas's term, any sexy, appealing, crafty, clever legislation that has come from our Senate? Dismas, do you remember any?
No.
Exactly. So we've paid for 7 years. They've delivered nothing. You know, if it was a marriage, you'd be considering getting a second wife. That's how bad it is. So the reality of the matter is this. For Wanjiku, the issues for us are clear. They failed to deal with corruption. They failed to stem the largesse of their own tumbocracy. Now, what is the capture that will happen in this referendum? For the politician, let's remember, there are more than 20 governors who are going to be serving their second and last term this term. They are looking at the referendum as an opportunity for a coalition. There's a governor who's sitting down and saying, you know what, I can be second vice president, second prime minister. That is one. Number two, There are others who are sitting and saying, if there is this region of blocks, I'll be the king of Coast. I'll be the king of Nyanza. Woe unto you if you elect one of those river-moving people or white and blue painting people. Now we will have entire provinces painted white and blue and rivers which point to whichever way his whims feel. So the reality is, for the political class, this is a survival move, because you must ask yourself what happens to a Joe after 10 years when it is clear Baba is going to run again. You must ask yourself what happens to these guys who are coming out of being kingpins in their little villages and they're used to a flag ahead of their car. They're looking for survival tactics. So we must be clear. It is us versus them.
Yes.
So Wanjiku must know, we reduce their numbers or they reduce what we eat on our plates every day. That's the question.
And all of this will come forth once the questions in the referendum have been set. That time will come, and of course we'll cross the bridge then. Hesbon, I've seen you doing some calculation earlier with regards to the numbers of the representatives that we have. And there's some interesting bite we had played earlier from the Koto Secretary General Francis Atwoli, saying that some of the representatives are even more than Kenyans themselves. And if you look at some of the proposal made by the Third Way Alliance, for example, I keep on referring to them because they're the ones who've been very vocal about this issue. With regards to the number of representatives, they're proposing to cut the members of parliament from the 347 to 190. That alone will cut the budget of the parliament from 36.8 billion Kenya shillings to just 5 billion Kenya shillings. After all, if this referendum call is not going to be hijacked, hopefully, it's going to serve Kenyans right. What do you think?
I mean, you know, if you look at the numbers, you probably would understand Francis Atwoli's hyperbolic statement that we have more representatives than the citizens. Because just elected leaders are 2,779. That's 1450 MCAs who are elected, 772 nominated. You have 222 MCAs at the county level. And what this math is talking about is that this number
2,222.
Yeah, 2,222. And if you look at this number and what we are getting, I mean, there's no value for money. So what would you rather do? Do you rather streamline the many MCAs, the many MPs, or just cut them down so that if you cannot deal with them, at least the number is small? And I think that is where Third Way Alliance is coming in, that there is actually need, you know, to first of all, and they're a lot more realistic compared to the Ufungamano initiative by the religious leaders, because they're talking about cutting down the number of representation, and they have figures for it. And it makes sense in terms of how much are we going to save, but it doesn't make sense in terms of what they're demanding. Like, I don't know any country in the world where the county, you know, has one governor, one senator, one MP. I don't think it can work. So I think they need to be a lot more practical, that we cannot, we've reached a point where we cannot have one county represented by one MP. I mean, it's just not practical. And that's why the public comes in. Is it something that is feasible, and can we discuss these things going forward? And then secondly, you realize that when you look at the faith-based initiative by the religious leaders, I mean, they are paradoxical in what they are demanding. One, they want to reduce representation, and at the same time they want to expand executive. Which one would you rather have? I mean, representation is by the people because we give them the power to lead. The executive is through appointment. So I think we need a situation where we are a lot more practical. Why reduce the number of representatives and then have a bloated, you know, executive? For me, that is something, again, that we probably need to address, because at the end of the day, you're better off with a representative that you can call and not an executive who is appointed. But most importantly, I think the numbers are just out of this world, and the value for money has been non-existent for the last 8 years. So at the bottom of what we are going to have in this referendum should be, how then do we reduce the number of people who represent us? First of all, MCAs. I support the proposal of just scrapping nominated MCAs. A lot of them are people who bring nothing on the table, absolutely nothing.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's a party leader who has nominated the mother and the mother-in-law. You know, somewhere where this must come from.
He was saving his marriage.
Yeah, I mean, he was saving his marriage. So his mother is nominated and the mother-in-law is also nominated.
And I think these are the reasons why the call for the referendum is getting a lot of goodwill from Kenyans. Dismas, I'm going to come to you
but
right now.
Let me just make one more point.
Yes.
That, you know, let me tell you, we cannot wish away the interest of the politicians. Politicians will have their interest in this referendum. And that is the most important thing for us, that as we give them a bit of their interest, what exactly is our interest? Because again, without these political leaders, there is no referendum.
Hesbon, and interestingly, there are certain, section members of parliament and politicians by extension who are against the referendum that everybody's talking about. Let's listen in to what their point of view is, first of all, before we continue this discussion.
Kubadilisha katiba si shida, lakini ni nini tunataka kubadilisha? Lazima tuketi, tuongee, tuangalie katiba kutoka kipengele cha kwanza mpaka mwisho, tuone ni nini tunataka kutengeneza. Sisi tunajua Raila ila anatafuta, anafikiri watabadilisha haraka, walete kiti ya prime minister, wagawane mamlaka.
Supreme Court hata ikasema kwamba hii IBC haikutekeleza wajibu wake wa kusimamia kura kulingana na katiba ya Kenya. Kama Supreme Court ilisema hivyo na haijarekebishwa, sasa tutawaamini namna gani wasimamie referendum? Ile hesabu walitoa wakati wa kura, wanaweza fanya hesabu kama ile alafu ipotoshe nia ya Wakenya kwa hiyo referendum. Kwa hivyo ni lazima tusafishe IEBC.
Watu wamekuwa wamejificha hapo. They mistook the handshake and building peace initiative kuwa kwamba wako ndani ya serikali kwa mlango ya nyuma ama kwa njia nyingine. I want to call that an installation.
And in connection to that, Majority Leader in the National Assembly, Aden Duale, had this to say. He said we should not pause our development agenda for the sake of providing seats for others. We must remain focused on the big four and uniting Kenyans, not creating offices for certain people. Dismas, I'm sure you wanted to react to what Hesbon said earlier, but it seems there are people within the political class who are a bit jittery with this call for a referendum.
Yes, several things that Hesbon said that require a response. If you're running an organization and you start making losses, like now Kenya started making losses, if you compare it to a commercial enterprise, the solution is not just to cut on some expenditures, that if you had a labor force of 100, you carry it down to 20. The solution is to venture and get new markets. So for the sake of Kenya, if we are unable to manage our economics, the solution is not to cut down on the elected leaders. It's to ensure that those elected leaders are able to deliver. For instance, for that Nairobi MCA who does not know her role, maybe she needs to be told to understand what her role is. And because she's nominated, the party, the burden stops with the party leader. That's number one. Then number two, the public service and the elected leaders.
What if she takes more than 5 years to understand her role?
What if she doesn't want?
But then what that means, then what that means, that we are going to be having a referendum every 10 years. Because the
and that's what you're
issues,
avoiding.
The inherent issues in Kenya is that we need to ask ourselves, does the public service deliver? Do our politicians deliver? Do they create an environment for the economy to thrive? So that for the maize farmers in Rift Valley, for the milk farmers, tea farmers, and coffee farmers in Kisii, they're able to get better value. For instance, do you have anybody from Kenya going abroad and trying to get new markets for the tea and coffee from Kisii? That would be a solution. So let's grow our economy that it's so big that the salaries for these leaders becomes immaterial. That is now that is very solid thinking. And then number two, one has to agree with what Salem Davadi and Wetangula have indicated, that you want to go and do a referendum. But what do we need to do? Have we done a critical path analysis to review the things that you must change before you go for the referendum? We need to sort out IBC. We need to look at this issue of corruption and the cost of living. You're not going to address corruption through a referendum. And we have evidence that before 2010, everybody was complaining the reason why Kenya is not in the level of Singapore or South Korea is because we have a horrible constitution.
Yes.
We reviewed the constitution, then Mishuki confessed in public that in fact what we wanted was to kick Moi. So now we have got a new constitution. All of us, some of us did not even go through the documents because we were told, if Baba's gone through the document, who are you? Even for the issues we are discussing right now, if you go and ask ODM guys who are saying that we must go for a referendum, you ask them, what issues do you want us to tackle? They'll say we're waiting for Baba. Before Ruto made a U-turn, you ask his, I don't know whether it's called Tanga-Tanga or his section of...
So it's all about individuals instead of looking at the real issues, yes.
Yeah, and now evidence has proved to us that these individuals do not drive Kenya consistent with national interest. They're driving a personal agenda.
Mark, I think Dismas had a cocktail of issues, but let me just give you a minute to react to that before we cross over to another.
First, I agree with him on one thing.
Yes.
The IEBC as currently constituted is like the old parliament, where there's opposition and the ruling party. So Chebukati 3 are the ruling party, and then there are 3 opposition commissioners. So clearly, we will have 2 results from the referendum. But moving away from that, we must be very, very clear. First, can we stop demonizing referenda? The country of Switzerland has 3 or 4 of those things per year. Okay, it is they practice something called direct democracy. And number 2, let's also be clear that in an age of technology, Kenya should actually be literally having very cheap elections. Let's just be very honest. Number 1, why do we print a different card from your identity card called a voter's card? Just the printing cost is ridiculous. Number 2, why do we have such complicated systems to elect? So we need to be very clear. Referendums are not evil. They are good for developing and growing the democratic space. Let's have one every year if that's what it takes to engineer our society.
It's exactly 2 minutes past the hour. Clearly, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to referendum. But something else that is of interest is Deputy President William Ruto's turnaround, or should I call it about turn, with regards to the referendum. Yesterday, he literally said, bring it on. He's ready as far as the referendum is going to change the livelihoods of Kenyans. Atobunga Apamo says we can change the constitution, but if we won't change, or if we won't change the leaders, then there will be no positive impact on the electorate. I agree with Mokwa Dismas. Let's change it for the good of Mwananchi. Keep the comments coming. I'm going to go through some of them within these broadcasts. But for now, let me take a very short break. Sunday edition. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
And I swear before God, you try that again and you'll see what is going to happen to you. Sisi hatutaki mchezo tena, kwa sababu tumeona yale ambayo mmefanya, na wale ambao walifanya tutawafuata. Pesa ya serikali ni ya mwananchi. Kwanza lipa mwananchi yule ambaye ametoa jasho ya kulima shamba lake.